Did you ever wonder why people rushed to buy Auntie Remy's famous meat? The answer wasn't in the seasoning or the grill, it was in the secret she hoped no one would uncover. What if the tender, juicy meat everyone loved was tied to something far darker than anyone could imagine? Hit the subscribe button and let's continue with the chilling story. Ojoju Market was the pride of the village, bustling with life and activity. Vendors called out their wares while the aroma of roasted meat and fresh spices filled the air. But one stall, Auntie Remy's Grill, stood apart. It wasn't just popular, it was legendary. Auntie Remy's meat had become the talk of the town. People described it as tender, flavorful, and unforgettable. Her fame spread quickly, and customers traveled from far and wide. But behind her warm smile and cheerful demeanor was a secret too dark for anyone to imagine. Auntie Remy's journey to success hadn't been easy. When she first set up her stall, no one paid her any attention. No matter how much effort she put in, she couldn't compete with the other vendors. Desperate to stand out, she turned to someone who always had answers, her Aunt Mama Bintu. Mama Bintu was a woman of strange remedies and unsettling wisdom. Known for her deep knowledge of ancient practices, she was both revered and feared in the village. When Remy sought her help, Mama Bintu's advice was chilling. "Use the water of the spirits," she said. "It will bind them to you." Remy laughed nervously. "Water of the spirits? What does that mean?" Mama Bintu's eyes narrowed. "The water used to wash the dead," she whispered. "Mix it into your marinades, and they'll crave your food like flies to honey. But remember, child, everything comes with a price." At first, Remy dismissed the advice as one of her aunt's superstitious tales. But as her struggles at the market continued, her desperation grew. She couldn't shake Mama Bintu's words from her mind. One night, after another disappointing day, she decided to act on the unsettling suggestion. The mortuary was a grim place at night. Its gates creaked as Remy pushed them open, and the air was thick with the scent of death. Her heart pounded as she approached the small office where Kunal, the mortuary keeper, sat half asleep in his chair. Kunal was a man of few words. His tired eyes scanned her curiously as she entered. "What do you want here?" he asked. Remy hesitated, her hands trembling. "I need the water," she whispered. "The one used to bathe the bodies." Kunal's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why would you need such a thing?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Remy forced a shaky laugh. "It's for a special recipe," she said, slipping him some money. Kunal hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but don't tell anyone where you got it." He handed her a small container. The next morning, Remy used the water in her marinades, feeling both fear and excitement. By noon, the results were undeniable. Her stall was surrounded by customers praising the richness of her flavors. For the first time, she felt hope. Her meat had become the sensation of the market. Word spread quickly. People came in droves to taste Auntie Remy's meat. The more they ate, the more they wanted. It was as though they were enchanted. Remy's stall, once overlooked, became the centerpiece of Ojoju Market. But with her newfound success came a growing unease. It began with dreams. Every night, Remy saw faces cold, lifeless, and hollow-eyed staring back at her. Their mouths moved silently, whispering words she couldn't hear. Each morning she woke up drenched in sweat, the images lingering in her mind. She tried to dismiss them as nightmares, but they wouldn't stop. Then came the shadows. One evening, as she was packing up her stall, she noticed a figure standing in the distance. It was a young girl with long, tangled hair and empty eyes. Remy blinked, and the girl was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained. At first, Remy told herself it was her imagination, but the shadows grew bolder. At night, she heard whispers in her home, faint and fleeting, just beyond the edge of comprehension. Objects seemed to move on their own, and the air felt heavy, as though unseen eyes were always on her. Despite her fears, Remy couldn't stop. The market was her livelihood, and her success had brought her the respect she had always craved. She pushed the unease aside, convincing herself that the whispers and shadows were just the price of ambition. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. One evening, her old friend Tunde visited her stall. His face was serious, and his voice was low. "Remy," he said, "I've heard things. People are talking about your meat. They say it's different. And not just in taste. They say the dead are restless. Remy froze. Tunde, that's nonsense, she said, forcing a laugh. But Tunde didn't smile. I've seen them, he said. At night, near your stall. Shadows that don't belong to anyone. Faces in the crowd that vanish when you look too closely. Something is wrong, Remy. You need to stop. Remy's stomach tightened at Tunde's words, but she maintained her composure. You're imagining things, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Tunde's gaze didn't waver. You know what I'm saying is true, he said quietly. Whatever you've done, it's not worth it. The dead don't rest when they're disturbed. That night, Remy's sleep was plagued with nightmares. She found herself standing in the mortuary, surrounded by rows of shrouded bodies. One by one they sat up, their hollow eyes fixed on her. Why did you take what belongs to us? They whispered in unison. You cannot escape the price. She woke with a start, her chest heaving and her body drenched in sweat. The whispers from her dream seemed to linger in the room, faint but persistent. She turned on every light in her home, but the shadows still felt alive, creeping in the corners of her vision. The following morning, Remy hesitated before heading to the mortuary. She could feel the weight of her guilt growing heavier with each step. Kunal greeted her as usual, his tired eyes scanning her face. You look like you've seen a ghost, he joked. Remy forced a weak smile. Just a rough night, she replied, avoiding his gaze. She quickly collected the water and left, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching her. As she walked back to the market, every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, and every sound felt amplified, like whispers carried on the wind. Business at the market continued to boom, but Remy's heart was no longer in it. Each praise from her customers felt like a dagger, reminding her of what she had done. The joy of her success was overshadowed by a creeping dread she couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as she was carving a piece of meat for a customer, she saw her. The girl from the shadows was standing at the edge of the crowd, her lifeless eyes fixed on Remy. This time, the girl didn't disappear. She simply stood there, unmoving, until Remy blinked. When Remy opened her eyes again, the girl was gone. But the whispers grew louder, and the air around her stall felt colder. Customers didn't seem to notice, happily devouring her food. But Remy could feel it, something was wrong, and it was closing in on her. That night, Tunde returned, his face pale and his voice urgent. Remy, you need to listen to me, he said. I went to the mortuary. Kunal told me about the water you've been taking. He's scared, Remy. He said strange things are happening to the bodies. What do you mean? Remy asked, her voice shaking. Tunde's expression darkened. The corpses, he said. Kunal said they're not at rest. He's seen their eyes open, their fingers twitch. He thinks they're trying to send a message. And Remy, he said, it started when you began coming there. Remy's heart raced as she tried to process Tunde's words. That's ridiculous, she said, though she didn't believe her own denial. Tunde leaned closer. You know it's not, he whispered. You've opened a door, Remy, and you don't know how to close it. You have to make it right. That night, Remy dreamed of the mortuary again. This time, one of the bodies sat up and spoke directly to her. It was a woman with a scar on her cheek and long, dark hair. You have stolen from us, the woman said. There is always a price for theft. When Remy woke, the woman's words echoed in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dead were closing in on her. As she prepared to head to the market, her hands trembled so badly that she dropped her tools. The sense of impending doom was unbearable. The market was unusually quiet that day. Customers came and went, but their chatter seemed subdued. The air felt heavy, and even the sunlight seemed dimmer. Remy worked in silence, her mind consumed by the visions and whispers that plagued her every waking moment. As the sun began to set, a man approached her stall. He was dressed in traditional attire, and his face was old and weathered, but his sharp eyes pierced through her. Auntie Remy, he said, his voice calm but firm. I've heard of your famous meat, and your secret. Remy froze. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer. You've been using water that doesn't belong to you, he said. The dead are not at peace, you cannot take from them without consequence. Panic swept over Remy. Who are you? She demanded, her voice shaking. The man's expression remained calm. Someone who knows the weight of your actions, he said. You have bound the living to the dead. And now, they want what is theirs. You cannot run from this. That night, Remy sat alone in her home, the man's words echoing in her mind. The shadows in her room seemed darker than usual, and the air felt suffocating. She could feel the presence of the dead, their unseen eyes watching her every move. Sleep felt impossible. As the hours dragged on, the whispers grew louder. There is a price, they said, over and over. Remy covered her ears, but the voices seemed to seep into her very bones. When she closed her eyes, she saw the woman with the scar, her lifeless eyes staring. By morning, Remy had made a decision. She couldn't live like this anymore. The guilt, the fear, the nightmares, it was too much. She needed to confront the dead and find a way to make things right. Her steps were slow as she walked toward the mortuary. The mortuary loomed ahead, its gates creaking as she pushed them open. The air was cold and thick with the smell of death. Connell wasn't there, and for that, she was grateful. She didn't want to explain why she was there. This was something she needed to do alone. Inside, the mortuary was eerily silent. The faint flicker of a light cast shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more unsettling. Remy's heart pounded as she stepped into the main room, where the bodies lay on metal slabs covered by white sheets. She approached one of the slabs, her hands trembling. Slowly, she pulled back the sheet. It was the woman from her dreams. Her scar was unmistakable, and her dark hair fanned out around her pale face. Remy took a step back, her chest tightening with fear. The air in the room grew colder as Remy stared at the lifeless figure. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Her voice echoed in the stillness, but there was no response. For a moment, she thought she had imagined everything, until the woman's eyes snapped open. Remy stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. The woman's gaze bore into her, unblinking and cold. Her lips parted, and her voice came as a whisper that echoed unnaturally in the room. "You took what belongs to us," the woman said. "And now, you must pay." Trembling, Remy shook her head. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she pleaded. "I was desperate. I didn't know it would lead to this." The woman's expression remained unmoved. "Desperation does not excuse theft," she said. "You fed the living with the water of the dead." The woman sat upright, her movements slow and deliberate. The sound of her shifting weight on the metal slab sent a chill down Remy's spine. "There is always a price," the woman said. "You cannot escape it. The dead are restless because of you. Balance must be restored." Tears streamed down Remy's face as she fell to her knees. "Tell me what to do," she begged. "How do I make this right?" For a moment, the woman said nothing. The silence was oppressive, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker and closer. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice low and filled with a terrible certainty. "You must pay the price," she said. "Only then will the dead find peace." Remy's heart sank. She had known deep down that this would be the answer, but hearing it aloud made it unbearable. The woman's lips curled into a faint, chilling smile. "The dead are patient, but their patience has limits," she said. "You took what was not yours. Now, give back what you can." As she spoke, the other bodies on the slabs began to stir, their shrouds rustling. Remy's chest tightened as she watched the other bodies slowly sit up, their hollow eyes fixed on her, and their mouths moved in unison, whispering, "There is a price. There is always a price." The room felt suffocating, and Remy's heart pounded in her ears. "Please," Remy sobbed, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. Just tell me how to fix this." The woman with the scar tilted her head, her gaze unyielding. "You already know," she said. "The living cannot take from the dead without offering something in return. What will you offer?" Remy felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She had sacrificed her peace and sanity for success, and now the cost was too great. "I'll give it all up," she said, her voice trembling. "The stall, the fame, everything. Just let me go." The woman's expression hardened. "This is not about your possessions," she said. "This is about balance. The water bound them to you, and now they cannot rest. To free them, you must give them what they need." Her words were cryptic, but Remy understood the implication. Remy stood shakily, her legs weak beneath her. She looked around at the restless dead, their whispers growing louder. She felt trapped, suffocated by their presence. "I don't know how to give you what you want," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman with the scars stepped off the slab, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. "Then you will never be free," she said, "and neither will we." Her voice was cold and final, like the closing of a door. The other figures began to close in. Remy turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more insistent. "There is a price," they chanted. She burst through the mortuary doors into the crisp morning air, but the weight of their voices clung to her. The market was unusually quiet that day. Auntie Remy's stall remained closed, the grill cold and abandoned. Whispers spread among the vendors and customers. Some said she had gone mad, others claimed she had vanished entirely. The once vibrant corner of the market now felt heavy and cursed. Days turned into weeks, and Auntie Remy was nowhere to be found. Tunde, unable to ignore his concern, went to her home. He found it empty, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the house was eerily still, and the faint scent of roasting meat lingered, though no fire burned. In the market, her absence became the stuff of legend. Vendors whispered about the price she had paid for her success. Some claimed to see her shadow lingering near her stall at night. Others swore they heard whispers when they walked by, faint but unmistakable. The mortuary keeper, Kunnel, spoke little of what he had seen, but he stopped taking money for the water. "Some things aren't worth the trouble," he told anyone who asked. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. The whispers of the dead had reached even him. Auntie Remy's stall remained untouched, a ghostly reminder of what once was. The grill, once alive with the sizzle of meat, stood cold and silent. The air around it felt heavy, as if the dead still lingered there waiting, and the whispers never truly stopped. And so, Auntie Remy's tale serves as a haunting reminder that success built on dark secrets comes at a heavy price. But what do you think? Was there another way for her to escape the whispers of the dead? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Stay tuned because the next tale might just make you question everything you believe.